After the reveal of Hwei, many questions started to rise. Why does he have a connection to Jhin? Why does he have 10 abilities? Is this really the result of 200 years of experience? Well, to at least some of these questions, we got an answer. Because not too long after Hwei was officially revealed, Riot released a post that talked about his design in greater detail. And this post goes through everything from his visual design to the challenges around his kit, and yes, it even dabbles a little bit in the mysteries surrounding his story. To which I would really wanna add, the lore community figured out some really cool theories that lead to some really cool details. So let's cover all of this as we dive into the latest post from Riot, which is Hwei's Champion Insights. As always, it started with a bit of an introduction. Hwei is the newest League of Legends champion who takes the role of a mage who paints his artistic visions. And he does it by painting living images that affect anyone who witnesses them. Remember this one because it will be important later. And with his paintbrush he wields destruction or support, controlling the thoughts and emotions of those around him. Remember this one too, because as you might know, demons are all about consuming emotions. The introduction then ends with the words, "He may not have a sword or gun, but don't underestimate the might of this brooding artist and his brush." After which we get our first look at the behind the scenes. Here Riot showed us some of the early pitches. It was simply a paint mage, a brooding anti-hero, and a humanoid male mid laner that didn't have purple skin or an exoskeleton. I assume they are referring to Ryze and Victor, or possibly Xerath. After which they confirmed that the idea of an art mage has floated around Riot for quite a while. As I mentioned in the last video, the earliest mentions date back to around 2013, though the exact year gets pushed around because it happened so long ago. After which we get some words from Orchidean, the narrative writer. Here we learned that the team purposefully wanted to end the year on a complex note, introducing a champion with a high skill ceiling. Which, I believe, it is safe to say, yup, they probably succeeded at that. But apparently, fitting a highly complex kit into an artsy theme wasn't easy. And so, overall, they had 3 different game designers who stepped in and refined the gameplay. And still, something wasn't really working. So before the champion concept was put on the shelf again, while they would focus on other ideas, they tried something they called about face on his gameplay. Which is something in the post they said they would explain later, but they never really explained what they exactly meant by that. But from context, I assume that they wanted to try the visuals first, and then they would get inspired for the gameplay. But again, that's just my guess. And as a result, both the narrative and the art evolved. It started with Hwei's visions and magic, which got more recognizable after they infused it with a bit more colors, which suddenly clearly communicated his abilities. Then they armed him with an Ionian paintbrush and a colorful palette. And suddenly, his powers were fueled with his own artistic expressions. After which, Lone Wingy, the art director, steps in. Apparently, they knew they wanted to make a spell mixer mage for a while, but mages such as elementalists or druids had already existed. So they had to leverage his unique thematic to create a new kind of archetype and gameplay. For once, they didn't focus on the brush being the weapon. The source of his weapon was just his own artistic ability. That's why he doesn't feel like a warrior or a swordsman. After all, magic technically comes from within, which is exactly what affected his in-game appearance, since all the power churned inside him. On the outside, he just looked like a sad fellow with muted colors. But that's until his powers would surge, which would also change the color of his eyes to reflect his mood, a feature which he can't entirely control himself. Here it was noted that he chronically and magically needs to share how he's feeling and what he's envisioning. It's a thematic link to the source of his power, which is the power of expression and holding nothing back from what's inside you. This quote is interesting because yet again, this is a link to the source of his power, which may hint that there is a demon or demons, which may force him into these surges of artistic outbursts. What's also cool is that in the next quote, Riot hints that we don't know how Hwei sees reality. That's part of Impressionism. But also the fact that he's about combining fiction with reality to give us a realistic expression mixed with imagination, which gives us surrealism. You know who else has reality warped around him with his artistic vision? That's right, now those links make a little bit more sense. But don't worry, there is a lot more later. Another great note is that Hwei should be one of the best artists in the world for his time. But clinging onto his human side, he would never admit it himself. He knows that there is always room for improvement. After which, they also point out that this level of commitment comes with a sacrifice. So while he is so strongly dedicated to his art, outside of it, he rarely pays attention to what he looks like to the outside world. Like, you know you are explaining this to the League of Legends audience, right? All of us are like this. None of us care what we look like once we leave our home, because we rarely do that. Just look at me. Anyway, I don't believe Hwei is being that unique for having that kind of a trait. Regardless, the point is that Hwei looks the way he does because all he ever cares about is the art. He doesn't care about being accepted by others. He's one of us. Now, after this, we actually got a little bit of his proper story. Here we learned that he spent a lot of his early life on a tiny Ionian island called Koyen, which apparently is so tiny you can't find it on the map. Though if you watched my last video, you would know that I wouldn't be surprised if it was somewhere in the south. Anyway, here, in a famed artistic temple in a small mill town, Hwei mastered the art of painting, as this was the place to learn the precision and balance to wield the power of artistic magic. But when Hwei tried to combine his intense imagination with his talent for painting, the masters told him he must rein in his abilities in favor of the more traditional practices. A kind of story which I've heard in League a few times before. And it never ends well. In fact, here we get a little bit of a teaser for what happens in his story. He ends up hurting people with the force of his expression in his youth, but is darkly intrigued by that force and feels the artistic drive to explore it. So he lives out his life in this duality between painting what is expected of him and what he has learned, versus painting alone in his extremely expressive and emotional style. Again, this does strike some similarities with someone like Zed and how he discovered the Forbidden Shadow technique. Though here it is added that Hwei is both fascinated and fearful of his own ability. So while he is thriving at the temple and is well respected, he is still hiding the full extent of his powers. But that's all until another remarkable artist arrives at the temple, who, over time, gets closer to Hwei. But eventually his visit concludes in a crescendo of destruction and death, forever altering Hwei's path. Yep, after watching the teaser again, now it is pretty clear that it was teasing that Jhin just murdered everyone in the temple. And who knows, maybe those ruins are now the ruins of that temple. So yes, right as the painting collapses, you can definitely see Jhin's explosion here, which was directly taken from Legends of Runeterra. And you know what? I'm excited about this, because every time Jhin appears in a story, it is a banger. Which immediately gets followed up by one of Hwei's quotes. "Jhin, you opened my eyes so much, I won't spare you from any of it." So yes, I'm pretty sure after doing this, he showed Hwei how destructive art can get. After this, the teasing continues. Hwei did not know Jhin's true nature until it was too late, and that complexity carries through when the atrocity happens. This person betrayed me and is not at all what I thought, but at the same time, witnessed and understood my art on a level that I hadn't allowed anyone to before, and showed me something that empowered it. So following Jhin's performance at the temple, Hwei was left devastated. But at the same time, he wanted answers. which is why he set out into the Greater Ionia. Hwei has experienced major loss, but emerged out of it still as an artist, not as an avenger or a cynic. Through his art, he navigates the deep sorrow and inner turmoil. As Riot said, this is not a character that can be overread. The depth of his play is purposeful, as is the depth of his narrative. And the notes here conclude, "It was fun for me to write and dig into all the layers that he presents. And I hope it's equally as fun for players to dig into what makes him tick and try to put together the nuances." He's also not a character that can be overplayed. So while you are piecing together the intricate lore theories, you can make some 300 IQ plays to match. I feel attacked on a personal level. But yes, the emotional complexity of this character is absolutely purposeful, because it is reflecting how complex his kit actually is. So naturally, that's where the post goes next. As you may know, in total, Hwei has 10 abilities. 3 spells bound to his basic abilities, each of which can be cast in 3 different ways. And his ultimate. It is a mage that is supposed to be targeting high-level players, but it took a few tries to nail down that design. Like they mentioned before, they had multiple different game designers stepping in before they actually pulled it off. And they tried everything from custom summoner spells to terrain manipulation. You know, painting landscape. But eventually they landed on the mixing of spells idea, which happened right before one of the designers had to step away to work on Arena. Here, at first, they wanted to make the spells formulaic. For example, every time you cast Q with something, it would be a skill shot. And every time you would use your E ability with something, it would act like Foxfire. This showed a lot of value, some of which actually made it into the full kit. In fact, if you look at the current abilities, over half of them have some kind of a pattern. For example, his Qs are skill shots. His W spells happen in an area. And his E is kinda chaotic. But the first version was a bit too formulaic. So they shifted it more towards the 3 spells having different themes. In this case, it would be Disaster, Serenity and Torment, which would be damaging abilities, support abilities and crowd control. Later in this post, they also mentioned that after they settled down on these 10 preset abilities, they were pleasantly surprised how quickly people were able to pick it up. And that's all thanks to the design. In case people wouldn't know what ability does what, just simply spamming your buttons is gonna give you a lot of common sense power. For example, just mashing your Q twice will give you a pretty good damaging burst. It is not ideal for every situation, but it still works. And you can do this with every one of his basic abilities. Just mashing buttons should still work. And this is how this champion can also appeal the lower level players. But ultimately, his strength comes from mastering the patterns of all 9 of his basic abilities, and having the muscle memory to use them in the perfect scenarios. And finally, at the end of the post, they make a quick jab at Aphelios, saying it's been years since the team could put this much design experience into a single champion. And just like Aphelios, Hwei turned out to be quite special. Though at the very least he doesn't need special UI. So, this was the post we got for Hwei. Honestly, besides just going into his overall design, it was a really cool teaser for what's to come with his story. And honestly, I can't wait to get his bio. I just hope it gives us a little bit more explanation for all the teasing around demons. Though as we learned here, the team is being vague on purpose. They love seeing people come up with crazy theories. One of which, I might add, is absolutely stellar. Do you remember the 3 hands that appeared in the teaser? Which I thought could belong to a demon, but they would be representing the 3 subjects. You know, Disaster, Serenity and Torment. While that may still be the case, there is also likely a good reason why the Masters had forbidden these. And it's because these 3 subjects might be evoking demons. In this case, the 3 hands would be Ashlash, the demon of joy, represented by the blue hand, Fiddlesticks, the prime demon or the demon of fear, represented by the red hand, And the third demon currently theorized to be the demon of despair, represented by the purple hand. So while it's possible that Hwei may not have a demon of his own, kinda like Neela, or even Swain, he may still be evoking the powers of these demons using his paintings. Which is something that sounds absolutely amazing. Because now, not only does his story include Jhin, but it is also teasing fiddlesticks, which is a fan favorite.